Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm joined by another Christian van Nieuwerburgh, a man whose professional title is Professor of Coaching and Positive Psychology, but who's also known as the coach on a motorcycle. That combination alone will tell you that this is not your average academic. Christian has a deep commitment to understanding what motivates people and how we can support them to thrive. He straddles the academic and practical worlds, blending robust research with lived human experience. And he's joining me on the show to talk about the concept of radical listening. It's the subject of his latest book, co-authored with Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener, called Radical Listening, The Art of True Connection. Now, if you think listening is simply about being quiet while someone else speaks, or you've heard the term active listening and think, well, isn't that just the same as radical listening? Think again, because radical listening goes far beyond active listening. It's about creating connections, demonstrating genuine interest, and making people feel truly seen, heard, and valued. In our discussion, we delve into why listening well isn't just a personal skill, but a powerful leadership and organizational asset. We discuss common barriers to effective listening, how intention shapes attention, and why our fast-paced world is crying out for more radical listeners. If you've ever been in a conversation where someone replies with, "That happened to me too," or offers you unsolicited advice, then this episode will make you reflect on how we often unintentionally undermine those we're trying to support. We also have a brief discussion about motorcycles, Route 66, positive psychology, and what it means to live your best life. All with the warmth, insight, and curiosity you'd expect from two Christians on a mission to make behavioural science accessible. So please enjoy, as I know you will, listening to my discussion with Professor Christian van Nieuwerburgh on radical listening. Christian, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Christian, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful podcast.
It is such a pleasure to have you here, and we're going to come on and talk about the fabulous book that you have co-authored.
Okay.
But before we do that, can you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, well, my name is Christian van Nieuwerburgh, but I prefer to be known as coach on a motorcycle. That's really my passion project. And I would say since I got into my professional roles, I've been consistently interested in human beings, what motivates them, and what we can do best to support them to learn, grow, and develop. That's probably been kind of a consistent theme in the work that I've done. And to come at that theme, I've explored many different theories. I'm, insatiably curious. I'm always wondering, I'm always asking questions. But the biggest things that have contributed to my understanding are probably coaching psychology, which I've worked in for a number of years, and more recently, positive psychology. So those are the two areas that I kind of lean on most, while acknowledging there's just so many different areas that are all about human beings, what motivates them, why they behave in the way they do. But those are my preferred areas of interest.
Amazing. And you straddle the academic and the practical, which is a kind of really interesting space to be.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's lovely when that gets acknowledged. It's exactly what I'm trying to do, Christian. There is a formal academic part of my professional role. I think that's valuable, and it allows me to stay pretty close to the research, Christian. So I'm a professor of coaching and positive psychology at a University of Medicine and Health Sciences. Professionally, I also am an executive coach. So I have so many conversations with people about what motivates them. And the beautiful thing about coaching is that we dispense with some of those, the social etiquette, the what's right to say and what should I hold back. We really get a very powerful insight into what motivates human beings. Why do people behave in the way that they do? So that's the professional side. On a personal note, I love traveling. I love meeting people. I love exploring new places. And until very recently, Christian, I've had to keep a pretty clear divide to say, this is my professional persona where I have to show up looking respectable and all of that. And here's my personal one where I'd rather be in jeans with a t-shirt on a motorcycle riding around. And it's been a pretty big step for me to try to integrate those two because I've seen, you know what, there may be benefit both ways.
Love that. And we'll come on and explore how those two things play together. I think the book is a great illustration of how all this fits together. But you mentioned coach on a motorcycle. Of course, the most important question as a fellow rider is to say to you, what is that motorcycle that you're coaching on?
Christian, great question. And I've gone to some lengths to provide an answer that is going to be inclusive. So I have two motorcycles. I've got one here in England and one on the island of Tenerife, where I split my time between those two places. So I have a BMW motorcycle in Tenerife. And in England, I have a Harley Davidson motorcycle. So either I've upset everyone or I've pleased everyone.
So this is an amazing thing because when I had my full stable of bikes, that was exactly the extremities I had,
Yeah.
recognizing both of those. Yeah. So love this. We'll talk about bikes after the show because I know there are listeners that don't know what that means. But for anybody who's listening, that's a pretty eclectic mix, but I love it. It fits exactly with my philosophy. And coach on a motorcycle, just tell us a little bit about so what's the philosophy behind that thinking?
Yeah. So the philosophy behind the coach on a motorcycle is in my various professional roles, I've had to be pretty connected to the academic side of things, stay close to the research. And the academic world requires me to present information in a particular way, whereas I've always wanted to share ideas as widely as possible. Christian, that's why I so appreciate you inviting me to the Human Risk podcast, because this is what I want to be doing. I really want to be sharing what I'm learning in the academic field with a much wider audience. So, part of Coach on a Motorcycle is I want to show people, look, this person, they are a professor with kind of the academic background, but they're also accessible. They're doing interesting things. And because my topic is positive psychology and all about supporting people to live their best lives, I thought, well, my best life would be I'm on my motorcycle a lot, traveling, and I'm talking about coaching, I'm sharing coaching ideas. And I love the idea that you and we can be coaches to people simply through conversations and interactions. You don't have to sit in a room to do the kinds of things that coaches do. And what do coaches do? Coaches allow people to live better lives. And I just wonder if there's a broader way of doing that than writing academic articles or, giving lectures.
And I love this because one of the things that strikes me, and you can look at the way research is published, the paywalls it often sits behind, the way that it's presented, it often feels alien to what I might term as the real world, the average human going about their existence. And I've always found it very, very strange, particularly where I could understand if you were looking at sort of, some technical part of physics or computer coding. But when we think about the social sciences and the thoughts, the sort of things you're thinking about, I think it's really important to bridge that gap because after all, this is about humans. And therefore, if there's any purpose to this, it ought to be made more accessible. So I love that approach and just sort of thinking about, well, how do we get this to the people for whom it actually would be useful? The people, so they're not just objects of study, that actually this can serve a useful purpose in the world.
That's a great point, Christian. And it's kind of serendipitous that you've said that because just before we recorded this podcast, I was at a team meeting at the Center for Positive Health Sciences. We've got an amazing group of academics, researchers, doctoral students. And that was exactly my point. I said, look, let's stay focused on the idea that the end result of research should be things being different in the world. So we were talking about the importance of dissemination. So I was saying, and believe me, Christian, we put so much work into getting an academic article behind a paywall, unfortunately, very often. So much work goes into it. It's a challenging process. And my point is, it doesn't end there. So it gets into that academic journal. Next thing is now we need to do a podcast about it. Now we need to put something on YouTube. So I do love the idea of sharing ideas that are research informed. So there is some research back there, but we don't all have to get into the ins and outs and the nitty gritty of the academic terms. There's some important learning in there. And my passion is, how do we make sure the people who are interested in that can just take it in a way that's digestible and immediately implementable?
Love that. More of that, please, to academic colleagues that are listening. I think it's really, really important because I think the stuff is incredibly useful. And I love it when that bridge happens, because I think, to your point, it's sort of get published, job done. Well, theoretic from an academic perspective, I can see how that. But actually, if you want to get, and particularly the sorts of things you're talking about, where we have a mental health crisis
Yeah.
and we have people are facing challenges.
Yeah.
And a lot, there are many things that we can't change in life.
Yeah.
But I think the way that we behave and the way that we perceive the world are things that are within our control. And so I love this idea of people. I don't want to simplify and say hacks to sort of have a better life, but that's the sort of direction of travel, which is just ways that we can start to change it. So even if the world is against us, things are going horribly wrong, we've got all sorts of disasters to manage, tons of things going on in the world that don't make us happy, that there is a way that we can at least exercise, regardless of how much agency we think we have quite a lot of agency in terms of our perspective on the world and the things that we can control.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right, Christian. What we need right now probably is more hope, right? All of us. We need a little boost of hope. When you look at the news, when you look at what's going on around us, we can become a little bit deflated, So I think coaching and the kinds of things that are coming up with in positive psychology are not only how do we think about things differently so that our own well-being is better, that's an important part of it, no doubt, but also just reminding all of us that we can do something, that it's not, I'm here, there's this world all around me. I'm part of that world. And there's some things that, you're right, this bringing this sense of agency back. There are many things that we can't control around us, but there are small things we can do. In fact, I'm just writing an article right now for a publication called The Conversation. It's a great website, by the way, The Conversation. It's where academics share their ideas in a way that's accessible. And the article is all about the need for us to remember that human beings have the potential of being both good and bad. So I look at the dark triad, the so-called dark triad of personality, which has been researched a lot by psychologists, and compared to the light triad, which is the more positive aspects of human personality. Somebody called Scott Barry Kaufman, he hosts the Psychology podcast. He and his colleagues came up with that idea. And again, what I wanted to do in that article is just say, look, there's a lot of research around a lot of these things, but ultimately, here's a few things that we can each do individually that can make things better for us and those around us. So I love that. And to go on a slight tangent, going back to coach on a motorcycle, an example of how I did that, Christian, and you might think I'm trying to draw us back into talking about motorcycles.
Feel free.
One of my lifelong dreams had been to ride my motorcycle from Chicago right through to Santa Monica. That's
So Route 66.
Road 66. Honestly, lifelong dream since I was maybe 14 years old. And one day I thought, I coach people about pursuing their dreams. I thought, how can I do that? And I'm not even doing my own thing. So I went for it. I went for it last year. Last year, I rode all the way across. But what I wanted to say is, on every day of that journey, I would share one insight from the field of positive psychology that I'm using in my own life, right? So it's all on YouTube. I've got the 19 days. At the end of every day, I picked one concept from positive psychology that I'm using that was relevant on that particular day. And that really comes back to this idea of academic and practitioner, because I'm not saying here's 19 things you can do, because who knows what everybody's going through. But I just wanted to make it real to say, these are theories I've studied. This is research that I'm aware of. And this is how I'm using them in my everyday life, just to highlight that there are so many things out there in the fields of coaching and positive psychology that can make a measurable difference to our lives and the lives of those people around us.
I love this. Not just the Route 66 bit, the other pieces as well. But what I really like about the way you talk about it is that often, and particularly the newspapers do this, and you see this on social media as well, sort of top 10 things you must do.
Yeah.
So, and what I love about the way you're talking about it is it's more like a toolkit,
Mhm.
right? Here's some things that may or may not be relevant for
Yeah.
you, and here's how you could deploy them. And it comes back to, for me, that sense of agency, because I can't stand these things that sort of pretend that the world of interacting with other humans is, if you follow this particular playbook X, well, almost like it's sort of the laws of Newtonian physics, right? We're guaranteed to be, this input will produce that output.
Mm.
And so I always think it's really dangerous when we have these kind of quick hacks, quick fixes, solutions to things. This is what you must do. Slavishly follow this and you'll get the outcome you're looking for. One, it's unrealistic, and so it sort of disappoints people. But the second thing is we intuitively know if these hacks were that simple and that effective, then we would have been taught, we'd have worked that out for ourselves. And so I love this idea that what you're doing is taking the social science and presenting it realistically.
Exactly. And I really appreciate that perspective. We're definitely on the same page, Christian, with this. Is, one of the really important things for me, and this was the case in the book as well, is to be really respectful of other people, to respect their autonomy, their intelligence, their dignity. And you're right. If there were, it's a bit of a trap, isn't it, Christian? Because I think all of us, we would love a silver bullet. I'd love you to give me the silver bullet that solves the one thing that's frustrating me more than anything else. So there's a bit of a trap there that many of us think, look, just tell me the thing I need to do. But you're right, that's not realistic. If there were such a thing, we would be doing it. Life is complex, and there's some beauty in that. And also, like you said, every individual is different. So anytime I share my ideas, and I hope that comes across in the book, but other things that I've written, I always try to say, here are some things that work for some people in some circumstances. And the way I'm trying to be helpful is not to say, I figured it out, just do this, but to say instead, I'm curious about these things. And here are some of the things I've learned. Might it be helpful if I were to share them with you? Then you can experiment with them. And there's so many cases, Christian, where people have come back to me and said, that thing you said, it was so useful. I adapted it. It didn't, I did this thing to it and I changed it. And for my circumstances, we had to do it like this. I'm delighted by that because that's really people personalizing whatever it is and making it suit their context. So one thing that, you and I both know because of our enjoying traveling and being in different places is how important context is. And for me, there's just so many levels of context, cultural context, organizational, country, and even within each person. I'm not the same today as I'm going to be tomorrow. So context is so important. So that's probably why there's never going to be, here's the answer for everybody in every situation. But why don't we broaden out, like you say, the toolkit to say, well, look, here's lots of interesting things depending on your context, where you are, who you're with, how you're feeling. And for me, I want to come back to the research part. For me, the research informed part is important, but we don't want to put research right up front so that it's kind of a barrier. I'd like the research in the background just for people to say, if I did want to follow this up, there is some research somewhere that I could look into. But I think the foregrounding of it makes it inaccessible. And I'm speaking for myself. I'm an academic. I've been working in academia for decades. There's still some articles where I'm thinking, I have no clue what is going on here. The jargon, the kind of the archaic way of presenting information, it can actually get in the way of us learning what we need to know.
Love this. You've just given me a memory actually back at school where one of my teachers used to ride a motorcycle and used to take our homework, used to occasionally come back with tire tracks on it because it had fallen off the back of his bike, which reminded me, I think it's a beautiful, actually, I think it works really well. Like academic papers don't sit nicely on the back of a motorbike because they'll go fluttering off in the wind and won't deliver anything.
Beautiful.
So there we go. That's where my mind was going as you were talking. You've mentioned it a few times and listeners will be familiar with the idea of active listening,
Mm.
but you've taken a slightly different term. Tell us a little bit about the book and obviously go into the genesis of it as well. But what are you trying to cover in it?
Radical listening. So I wrote this with a wonderful friend who's such a provocative thinker, very challenging in his thinking. That's Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener. He's one of the leading figures in the field of positive psychology. And the reason I wanted to partner with him in writing this book is he is provocative. He likes to challenge things, he likes to take things apart. And both Robert and I are executive coaches in addition to the other things we do. And in coaching, listening is just such a core concept. So, what we wanted to do, two things. One, we wanted to kind of share a kind of a secret that's within the coaching community that, simply, or another way of putting it is the quality of the listening that you provide can actually build connection with other people. That if you listen to people well, they think better. As coaches, that's what the whole business is based on, the ability for us to listen in that way that helps other people to do their best thinking. And the other part was for us to say, look, there's a lot of complexity even within listening. So you're right, active listening, what a great platform. And I love active listening. And for me, active listening are all the strategies that will help us to understand what the other person is saying and look like we're listening. That's how I see it, is a lot of the techniques to make it look like we're listening. If you were to say, well, what's radical listening? Radical, there's two parts. One, it's a radical because we say you must be interested. It's not really like looking like you're interested. Radical listening is about listening in a way that makes people feel seen, valued, and heard. So the purpose of radical listening is really about how the other person feels. So that goes beyond active listening, I think. And the other reason it's radical is we suggest some things in the book that are not traditionally understood within the active listening framework. Like, we think interjecting is an important part of listening. So jumping in with comments, those minimal encouragers, we think that's important. We also propose that asking questions is part of listening. And so I would consider you, Christian, an example of a radical listener. You're not just sitting there listening, you're asking questions, you're sharing your insights as well. So radical listening for us is a way of listening. People feel seen, valued, and heard, but also your conversational partner has no doubt that you're interested and engaged. And that's because you're fully participating in the conversation.
I said to you before we started recording that one of the things I thought was remarkable, and I was about to say, I've got to be honest with you, I was about to say as I read the book, but I haven't read the book. I've listened to
Oh,
it
great.
because I felt that given the subject matter, it would be weird to read, and I wanted to actually listen to it. So as I was listening to the book, to be 100% transparent on this, one of the things I found fascinating was that I felt really, what I said to you before is I felt really seen.
Mm,
Because I'd always put listening in a bracket. Well, it's sort of almost a binary thing, right? You're either listening or you're not listening. And you go into a whole lot of detail about different reasons we might listen.
yeah.
And as you were explaining those, and I'll get you to talk through maybe one of them or just explain that, I just found myself going, yep, done that, done that, done that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always that I was criticizing myself because there are valid reasons for these different things. But I just was like, oh, there's a level of complexity here. And maybe I'm not as good at this or as in control of these as I thought I was because I hadn't recognized those distinctions. So as I was listening, I felt very, very, you'd almost crept into my head a little bit and just made me go, hey, when you're doing that, this is actually yeah, actually wasn't even saying this is what is going on. It was, this is what you might be doing.
Yeah. Thank you. What a great way of saying that. And, I just want to say up front that Robert and I took a lot of time once the concept was clear in our minds, thinking about the reader or the listener. And the publisher we work with, Barrett Kohler, they've been great from the outset. And one of the things we said is busy professionals nowadays may prefer to listen to this. And it's a book about listening. So right from the outset, we had the idea that there would be an audio book, and we took care and time to identify the narrator, the person who'd be reading it out. We listened to quite a few people, and there's an ebook version of it. There's a text version of it. So we really wanted to connect with the reader or the listener. So that was always our intention, because the subtitle of our book is The Art of True Connection. And I was thinking, you know what? If we're talking about connection, is there a way that we can connect with readers and listeners intentionally? So that I'm going to come back to intention in a moment. And so for those people who are going to read a real text of it, buy the book and read it, you'll notice that it's got my own hand drawings in there. The drawings are hand drawn. And our intention was two things. One is convey to our readers and listeners that this isn't set in stone. We're learning as well. So here's a few things, like we were talking about earlier. Here's a few things we've learned. Here's a few things we'd like to share. But this isn't the whole picture, and we might be wrong, and there could be other things that join up. But the other is, I really wanted to convey to the reader or listener that we care deeply about this interaction. And it is an interaction. I mean, even though I'm not sitting there with the reader, there is an interaction going on between us, because I have an intention of conveying ideas and sharing ideas. And hopefully, the reader or listener is bringing with them their own motivation. So let me go on to now one of the big ideas behind the book. One of the big ideas behind radical listening is that we can be more intentional about the way that we listen to people. And so I guess most of us in our everyday lives, suddenly we're in a conversation, we're on the receiving end of it. We may have preferences of how we like to listen, or we might be distracted by other things. So most often it kind of happens without us taking the time to say, oh, I'm going to be sitting with so and so shortly. How am I going to listen to them? So that's what we're actually suggesting is helpful to do, is to put an intention into our mind of what's really my motivation for this next interaction. And we share 6 motivations, common motivations. Again, there's probably many more than these, but we cluster them in groups of 3. There's some social motivations for listening. So we can be motivated by connecting with people. So let's say you go to a social event. That would be the helpful intention to have, to go in there to say, I'm not actually going in, I'm not going to be listening because I want to understand something, or I'm not going in because I'm trying to solve something. I'm going in because I want to connect with people. And then we think the other big idea is intention there then leads to attention. So if I'm going in with the intention of I'm going to listen to people here so that I can connect with them, I'll be listening out for, oh yeah, what similarities are there? What connections are there? And it allows us to focus in our attention on the things that are most relevant, because there's just so much information coming to us. We couldn't possibly try and think, oh, I need to pay attention to everything. No, I'm only paying attention to the things that are about connection. So for listeners of this podcast, hopefully their intention was to learn something, I guess, or maybe the intention is to be entertained. But either way, if your intention is, I just want to be entertained, I'm having my lunch, I just want something to listen to, you'll be listening for the interesting anecdote. You'll be what? Route 66? Or if you're listening with your professional hat and you're thinking about risk factors, or you're thinking about how does this work in my organizational setting, and that's listening to learn, you're going to pick up on the little nuggets, and you're going to be thinking, I'm particularly listening out for what can I do in my. So that's what we mean. Intention leads to attention. Now, there's some social motivations, which are influence, connect, or appreciate. And then there's some cognitive motivations, which are learn, understand, or solve. Let me tell you the other big idea. And this is one where listeners can immediately experiment with this idea. And the other big idea is the idea of optimal matching. And there's been some research into this in the 1980s. Remember, I said just so you know, there's some research back there about this. But the important thing to remember is optimal support matching means making sure that the support you're providing matches what is required by the other person or persons. So let's say a family member comes back after a hard day at work, and they just want to tell you about what happened. Now, sometimes we go into autopilot, and I just always listen in the way that I would always listen. But optimal matching means thinking, what is it that my conversational partner wants? Do they just want to be acknowledged? Are they coming and saying, look, it was a nightmare at work. This thing happened again. You won't believe it. Are they just trying to, is there what they need just to be listened to and somebody to say, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. How did you manage that? Some people want that. Or are they looking for somebody to help them solve it? Right. And I hope immediately listeners are thinking, yeah, I can see how the mismatch there is problematic. If I just want to be listened to, Christian, and I'm telling you about the kind of problems I'm having with my motorcycle, with my BMW motorcycle, and I just need a bit of acknowledgement to say, those motorcycles, they can be a bit tough. But instead of that, you were giving me advice. Hey, go get to that place. You need to go get it. I'm like, no, no, I just want you to hear this. So that's an example of how important matching is. And if listeners are saying, well, how do we do that? There's a very complex, difficult way of doing it. And then there's a straightforward way. The complex, difficult, maybe impossible way of doing it is using all of our instincts, try and gauge, I wonder if this is what's wanted. The simpler way is to ask people. I love the idea of negotiating this, to say, okay, it sounds like you've had a bad day. How would you like me to support you right now? And because that person might say, look, I just need some ideas. Just give me some ideas. Or I want you to dive in and solve it for me. Can you go in and do? Or look, just it'd be great if you just listened to me because I just need somebody to talk to.
And that example is brilliant in my mind because I have found myself, and I'll stereotype massively now here, but
Yeah.
that's a classic sort of man-woman thing where, the woman just wants to offload, the man thinks he needs to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so I've been there loads of times. And so I love this. That's one of the examples of where I just felt really seen because it's kind of, it's, as you say, right, you're speaking in, we not both speak, it's just sort of two different approaches to the same thing.
Yeah.
And I loved it as one looks at these things, what you're in essence just going is we need to frame what is going on here.
Mhm.
And the way I made sense of this, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, was to think about this as a sort of data challenge,
Mm.
right? Which is to say that there's a load of data that's being transmitted two ways, but what are we trying to get out of this? And therefore, which bits of data do we pay attention to? Because I'd always thought listening was either you were paying attention, simple analysis, the sort of thing you were taught at school, pay attention,
Mm.
right? But what you point towards is there's different forms of attention.
Yeah.
And therefore, the data that we're looking for to get out of that, the things that we pay attention to, the things that we need to play back,
Yeah.
and how we play, how we use that is what's really, really important. And we often don't think about that. It's sort of like, am I listening to what's going on? Am I aware of what's happening? But actually sort of thinking about the data that I'm taking on board and how I'm processing it. Is that a good way to look at this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so helpful to think about it as that because it is exactly that. There's data. And the example we're using now, it's a fun example to think about, uh, particularly because there's good intentions on both sides, right? So when somebody dives in with a solution, your partner's telling you about a complex thing, and you think, well, I'm going to help you solve that, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. You see how this is an example of there is good intention, but there's not what's so-called optimal matching. Actually, there's a mismatch. And it's frustrating because both people have a good intention and you could end up with a suboptimal outcome or a damaged relationship when, again, I want to reiterate, in this example, both are coming with a positive intention. And I would also take this into the workplace, Christian, of managers. You're a manager, you're doing what it is you do. One of your direct reports comes to you with a problem. I've got this thing going on. Now, as managers, it's easy for us to go straight into problem solving mode and to assume this person's telling me this information because they want me to give them the solution. So that's another, sometimes that will be exactly what's going on, and sometimes that's not what's happening. And there will be situations where, and this is going to sound a bit strange, but not telling the direct report what to do is the thing that's best for the relationship and for the direct report. So I think that's what we're trying to add here is start with an intention to say, well, I'm going to listen to my direct report in a way that makes them feel valued, for example, and then make sure that the listening is matched to what's required. And how many managers out there have said, leave it with me, I'll deal with it, right? So that, again, what a great intention. Wonderful. But once you've said, leave it with me, I'm going to be a bit challenging here. You might be creating a sense of helplessness. That's learned helplessness, is that your direct report learns every time I have a problem, I go to my manager, I tell them what it is, and then they're going to solve it. It means that I don't need to solve it, but it also means that in my mind, I can't solve it. I don't know what to do because when something goes wrong, I go to my manager. So I never build up that self confidence. I can do it. So a slightly different interaction is somebody goes to the manager, hey, I've got this thing going on. The manager says, how would you like me to help? And the direct report says, oh, well, could you get in touch with so and so for me? Or the manager could say, what do you think is the best thing to do here? Do you see? So gradually changing the dynamic, making sure we're matching and showing that we're interested in what the other person wants. Going straight to the solution shows that we may be more interested in the solution rather than the person. So simply asking the question, how can I be most helpful to you in this situation? Isn't it great? Because one, it shows that you're interested in the other person and you're showing, I'm trying to match my support to what you need. But the other is we get data about what it is we should focus on in this conversation. So if my direct report said to me, Christian, what I want is 2 or 3 ideas that I can take away and just try. Great. Well, I'm going to focus in on let's get pragmatic. But if they say, I just think I need to offload this, just so much on my mind right now, then I'm listening for something else. I'm listening for emotions. I'm listening for what do I appreciate about this person? I'm listening for how can I connect things together? So you're absolutely right. If we think of interactions as being full of data, and remember, there's way too much data for any human mind to be able to capture and process, it really is about helping us to direct our attention to where it's going to be most helpful for the person we're listening to.
And we've talked about one of the times I felt seen in the book, which was this tension explaining versus just sort of giving them an outlet. The other one, and I want to mention this because this was really it made sense, but was counterintuitive, is this idea that when people tell us something, and you use the example of they've gone somewhere, I think Hong Kong was the example in the book, you go somewhere, the natural tendency to talk about if we have been there ourselves is to bring our own version of the story.
Yeah.
And I'd always thought, before reading the book, well, that's helpful, right? Because I'm empathizing. I'm saying, they're talking about how amazing this place is and you're bringing your own experiences of it. But you make the point that that's not actually necessarily the way that it's received. And I think that's a really, really good illustration of this point you've made before about good intentions can go horribly wrong. And there I had I've thought back loads of times. I was sort of replaying loads of conversations. I've done it so many. And I think locations is a really good illustration, right? And so in trying to connect with the other person, you actually you almost disconnect from them. And can you just talk a little bit about that? Because it blew my mind in a kind of like, oh my God, how many times have I done this way?
Well, Christian, sometimes it is helpful. So don't be too hard on yourself about that, I'm sure. I mean, having chatted with you, you're such a great person to interact with, and it shows enthusiasm. So it's just being aware of these things. So I want to share, we call these barriers to radical listening. And the one we're talking about now is the comparing barrier. And I'll share a few of the barriers because I think it's helpful for listeners to be aware of them. And once we're aware of them, we can use them in a way that is helpful. But one barrier is that it happened to me too effect. So if somebody's saying, you won't believe it, I'm going to go on a tour of Antarctica on a ship. I'm going to go on. Oh yeah, I've been on that. I went to Alaska. It's mine. You're going to love it. So where it becomes a barrier to radical listening is if we take the turn away from the other person, right? So if I jump in and say, oh, I went to Antarctica and this is what it was like. You're going to love it. We had all this amazing stuff. Suddenly, the other person who kicked it off feels like, oh, it's not about me anymore. So that's where it's a barrier. But if we can find ways to jump in, like, oh, Antarctica, oh my goodness, I did a trip to Alaska. It was amazing. Tell me more about what you're going to be doing. So the idea of jumping in, this is the interjecting, and then passing back to say, now you tell me because you were talking. The other one, I think people will resonate with, and it's happened to me recently, and I took it as a bit of a research study. We call it the I have it much worse, or the competing one. So this literally happened, Christian. I was saying to somebody that I work with, I was saying, look, I'm kind of a little bit struggling this week. There's so much on. I've got all these things to do. I said, I've got over 100 unread emails in my inbox. I said, over 100. My colleague says, 100. I've got 250, right? So my colleague's like, I've got 250. So I just said, hold on a minute. I'm working on this stuff. So I said, look, and they're a good colleague. I said, can you just tell me why you've given me that information right now? And again, it was well intentioned. So this is really what we want to highlight. Most of this is just tweaking how we respond. So the positive intention, my colleague said, was, I just wanted to make you think, yeah, I know what it's like for you, and I've got it worse than you. So you're not too bad. 100 isn't that bad, was the intention. But think about it from my point of view. Suddenly I felt like, oh, I shouldn't be complaining. It's the attention wasn't on me anymore. And all I really wanted from that interaction was a bit of understanding and a bit of compassion to say, oh my gosh, 100, well, you better get on to those. And if there's anything I can do, that would have been the ideal match. The mismatch was for the other person to say, well, I've got it much worse than you have, right? But isn't it funny, that positive intention? And then the one that, again, I think maybe quite two other things I want to mention. Unsolicited advice. Now, that's a barrier to listening, right? So somebody says, oh, I'm not sure whether to, go on this highway or go on that back road. There's so many situations where we're so tempted to just jump in. Well, oh, what you need to do is do that thing. But if the purpose of this person sharing that dilemma was to explore it for themselves, you're actually getting in the way of that. So that famous saying, if I walk 100 steps in someone's shoes, for me, it's if I walk 100 steps in someone's shoes, I'm 100 steps away from them and I've got their shoes, basically. Around that phrase, we have to be very careful. Please note, if you're a listener and you note yourself saying, oh, if I were you, or if I were in your shoes, unless somebody's asked for it, it's probably unhelpful, because it leads to a really immediate response from people of, but you're not in my shoes. You don't know what it's like. So just be careful of unsolicited advice. But probably the most prevalent, Christian, right now in the world we're in is time poverty. This perception that we don't have time. And we call this the walk with me a barrier. When you're a busy professional, somebody says, hey, can I come and chat to you about this? The truth is, well, your diary's booked. You're fully busy. You don't have time. But instead of saying something like, what you have to say is important to me, I don't have time right now. When can we find some time? Again, with good intentions, we try and shoehorn it in. We're like, oh, we haven't got time, but don't worry. I'm just typing out this email. Talk to me while I'm typing the email. I don't know if anybody resonates with that. But if you've done that, or you've said, I'm going to my next meeting, just walk with me, you're kind of saying to them, I don't have enough time and you're not my number one priority. My number one priority is to get to the meeting. Your number four priority, you can tag along and talk to me but I'm not really fully there. So radical listening, another way of thinking about it is it's a promise to give people our full and undivided attention for a period of time. And I know how busy things are. We're not talking about you need to set aside an hour. You can do radical listening in 2 minutes. You can say, great, I've got 2 minutes right now. But what it requires is that you put away all other distraction and you convey to the person, during this time that we've allocated, my attention is completely with you and what you want to talk about. So as long as we can do that. So that's why I just wanted to share some of these common barriers. But as long as you can jump in with information, as long as you pass the turn back. So in the Antarctica example, oh, you're going to Antarctica. I booked a trip like that 3-4 years back. What is it you're most looking forward to? You see, you can still do the bit of, oh, you're talking to someone who gets you. I know what you're talking about, that connection bit, but you don't want to then take their turn.
Love this. And I felt every single one of those, right? I'm pretty sure I've got the full card of all of those.
Oh, yeah.
And the book is obviously written to help the reader stroke listener, in my case, to sort of think about how they behave. But it's also incredibly helpful as a guide to what other people are up to.
Mm.
And I found myself, as I was having conversations with people, had to be a little bit careful because I was almost kind of clocking out, oh, they're doing that one, they're doing this, sort of like just becomes a checklist of have they got the full house on those things. But I thought it was a very, very powerful tool to also, if one thought about it, not just about how can I do things, but if you start to see dynamics. And I think it really struck me that in particularly in the workplace where there might be a power imbalance between people having conversations, to be able to observe those dynamics and recognize what's happening, can allow one either it's just fun to watch, right? So there's a very simple sort of, I'm not going to do anything about it. But also, I thought it was really interesting. If one wanted to intervene, you have an early warning system of things that particularly if it's a senior member of staff, or again, classic stereotype, sort of man to woman, you start to see what the mechanisms are. And therefore, you can recognize these things. I found it very helpful as an early warning system to other conversations that I might not necessarily, you might be in the periphery of or join late, where you perceive a dynamic and suddenly it gives you a key to unlock what is going on. What you then do with that is, of course, another question. But I thought it was super helpful for people watching.
Well, I love that perspective, Christian. Thank you for sharing that. It's really rich, and I haven't thought about it much before, but one thing that springs to mind, there's two things. One thing that springs to mind is it encourages us as speakers to be clearer about what it is we want. So that would be a good strategy for us as speakers. So when we do go to people, we can say, hey, Christian, I'd just like to run something by you. I just want to throw some ideas around. You're kind of saying, I want to do some of that. Or I could come to you and say, Christian, I'm here. I really need some advice. Can you so being clear about what's wanted, that helps. But the other one is huge, Christian, because for me, I guess everyone having a voice is so important. It's a really important kind of value for me, is people having a voice. And so I like that if it's true that we can use this book as a way of becoming more alert to what are the kind of the different listening interactions that are going on. And are there some people who are more listened to than others, some people who have less of a chance of having a voice than others? So if it can bring that lens into workplaces, I love that. And you're right, let's set aside for now, what do we do with that information? But it can definitely give us a lens of what's actually happening in that dynamic. And you bring power dynamics into it. And that's something we're interested in as well. So I would say, if you're in any interaction where you're the one with the hierarchical or positional power, that you need to be ultra alert, that you're allowing other people to have a voice. If, for example, if you're a director of a company, to create psychological safety, to make it safe for your employees to tell you what they really think, that does take effort. And it's going to require you to be very explicit to say, hey, everyone, if this is what you want. But for example, let's say you're getting your team together to hear their open and honest views about something that's going to happen. I just want to emphasize that if with somebody with power, you're going to have to do more work than everyone else in order to create that psychological safety. So it might be to say, in this context, I'm not here to evaluate. I really want to hear your voices. And for example, if anybody does have the courage to speak up, be extra acknowledging and appreciative of it. Say, oh, I really appreciate that. So I like that you brought power dynamics in because they play a big part. Part of people being seen, valued, and heard is that they feel that they can say what they're really thinking. And in many contexts, the reality is I'm not going to be able to say what I'm really thinking because of the power dynamic.
I love this. And the other time I've used the book practically was tested it out in scenarios where I might ordinarily switch off.
Okay.
So things I was not. So let's imagine. I don't know. Let's pick a real example, right? Conference.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of sitting in a session and I'm just sort of here waiting for the coffee break. And it would be almost like it would be rude to walk out because I've chosen like terrible conference naivety of choosing a seat that means it's really hard to leave. Classically, conference tactic is always get the emergency exit equivalent, right? So you can quickly slide out. So here's a session I'm not desperately interested in. And I just thought to myself, I started to play through some of the advice that you gave. And in some cases, it was helpful. But I did reach a point with certain things I was listening to where I just thought, no matter how I try and twist this, this is not right. Whichever lens I choose to approach it, it's just not working. I presume it is okay to sometimes just go, this is not landing. And therefore, there's not an obligation. Like, I get it if you're one-on-one with someone, you don't want to be rude. But if I'm sort of listening as an audience, or it's just someone's droning on. We've all been in those kind of scenarios.
Yeah.
I presume at some point you just go, not everything is listenable, I guess.
Exactly. That's such an important point. And maybe we should have been clearer about that in the book, actually, Christian, because we're not suggesting that we should be radical listeners all the time. And since then, I've become clear about the two scenarios where radical listening is necessary. So one, where the relationship is important to you. Well, that radical listening is essential. And in the example you gave, that particular relationship isn't important. And by the way, exit seat strategy is a great idea from that point of view, because we don't want to offend people either. But if the topic isn't interesting and there's no relationship between you and that person, time is valuable. And you sitting there with taking nothing is actually not helpful for either party. So I think that's an example where, yes, that would be a great idea. But the other one, it's a little bit more kind of deep and maybe more to do with what's going on right now. It makes sense, right? If the relationship's important, you want to listen in a way that values them. And that I'm including personal relationships and professional relationship, any situation where that relationship is important. So if you're a manager, the relationship between you and your colleagues is important, radical listening. And the other one is where we can't carry on in the way we're carrying on. And I'm talking about polarization and big divides, maybe even in neighborhoods. Let's say me and my neighbor, we, have some kind of disagreement about a hedge or something, and we're not talking to each other, etc. Those situations actually require the courage to have those conversations. And radical listening, one of the skills is acceptance, Christian. And this is the one I get the most questions about. People are kind of curious, what do you mean? But my logic is, if we don't accept the right of the other person to hold an opposing view to mine, then of course I'm not going to listen to them because I'm thinking you're wrong, especially about the hedge. I'm like, well, you're wrong about that. So why would I listen to you? So one of the skills needed to be a radical listener is to accept the right of people to hold the beliefs and opinions that they have. It's not saying we agree with those opinions. I could still disagree, but it's saying I understand that through your own life and context, you've come to a certain view, and I accept your right to have that view. And therefore, if I accept that, then there's the opening for a conversation. And this is a naive view, Christian, but I think I'm thinking about real kind of polarized situations. I think one way to break the polarization is for us to accept that, to say, I still don't agree with what you say, but I respect you at a human level. I respect you as a human being. And part of that respect is you are entitled to have any view that you wish to have. And I'm going to listen to you. I want to understand, how did you come to this view? What do you think about it now? And I think extending that kind of openness to hearing what they have to say, this is the naive bit, but I also kind of believe it, is that if I do that, they're more likely to say the same back to me. Because remember, for them, I'm the one with the unreasonable, unacceptable, immoral perspective. I'm hoping that they would say, okay, well, how did you come to your view? And so for me, radical listening is that little seed of connection of, okay, now we're talking. Now we're having a conversation. We're being curious about each other's perspectives. That could become a dialogue, not necessarily and not always, but I see more hope rather than us. And so this is a good question to our listeners now is two questions. Are there some people you'll never listen to? Right. And is it okay? Because if it's okay and it doesn't, great. And are there situations where you know you're going to find it difficult to listen to something? And that could even be feedback, negative feedback, constructive feedback. If I know I'm going into a session where I'm going to receive that, what is my attitude as I go in? What's my intention? Am I going in? Well, this is one of the antisocial motivations for listening is listening to defend. So imagine I go into my meeting with my manager and they're going to give me feedback about how I've performed the whole year. And my thing is, I need to defend myself. I'm not really listening to the feedback. I'm only listening to say, no, but that didn't happen, or no, you don't have the full picture. So yeah, that's probably helpful for us to know. Who would we not listen to? Brackets, and is that okay? Because it might be. You might say, well, I have no interest and I'm not, there's no benefit to me listening to that. Then don't listen to them. And the other is thinking of situations where we know we're going to find it difficult to give people our full attention. And I'll give you a personal example. I'm a coach. Sometimes my clients come with topics that I know very little about or aren't naturally things that I'm excited about. What I do, and I think we can all do this, is switch our interest to the person. So let's say the topic isn't that exciting. I might switch my interest to, oh, what is it about this person and that topic? And I don't want to offend anybody by even suggesting a topic. I can't suggest any topic, but you know what I mean. There'll be topics that some of us, we're just not interested in those topics.
Radical as this sounds, Christian, there will be people that are not interested in motorcycles. I mean, I don't understand that perspective, but I'm sure they exist theoretically, right? There must be humans that don't get that. So that would be a good illustration of the flip side, right? We might be banging on about that.
Yeah.
And they don't get it. So we can, a very, very small number of people who have yet to experience the joys, right? But nonetheless, right? They hypothetically exist.
But Christian, you've done exactly the right thing. That is a great way for us to be compassionate, to switch things around. Because it's not, what do I do if people are talking to me about something I'm not interested in? What would it be like if I were talking about something to somebody about motorcycles and they're not into motorcycles? Another example I can use, because I'm on the wrong side of this as well, is football, right? So I'm really into my football, and there's some people who aren't into it at all. So if I were to say, I'm from Belgium, and I were to go and say, hey, yesterday Belgium won in the whatever competition, which is true, somebody who's not interested in that might say, well, I'm not really interested in football. And they could say to me, Christian, I'm not really interested in football. But if they try to build a connection with me, oh, what is it that you're excited about? Or, what is it? What was amazing about that? Or what are you hoping for? So do you see that we can switch our attention from the topic of motorcycles to what is it you love about motorcycling? Because then we can talk about that. Well, what I love about it is the sense of freedom. If you're listening because you want to connect with me, you can connect with that. You can be like, oh, yeah, I get freedom. Maybe I've never ridden a motorcycle, but I get the idea of freedom. This idea of the open road. Oh, yeah, I get that. So, yeah, switching from topic to the person, being curious about the person, that's been for me a surefire way to stay connected, because it doesn't mean I'm thinking, oh, I don't really like this topic, I'm going to stop listening. I'm not interested in this topic, but I'm interested in this person and I want to keep connected with them. So I would say, oh, tell me more about that topic.
What I love about the techniques that you're proposing here is back to your point about, are there going to be some people that we don't want to listen to at all, that we ignore? What I love is that we can make that decision based on having given them a chance.
Oh, yeah.
So if we have a sort of collaborative conversation where I've given you, you're sort of like handing out an olive branch, right?
Yeah.
And kind of going, let's try and build that bridge.
Yeah.
And so I always think it's really comforting along the lines of, and we can delude ourselves here, admittedly, but along the lines of sort of like, well, I did try, right? And providing we genuinely try, right? Not just sort of like, I gave it half a second's effort. But I think that's quite healthy because then at least you've got a data point for that decision not to engage.
Yeah, I would prefer that, Christian. I would prefer somebody said, look, I really don't think I agree with them and that particular view, but I gave it a shot. I went and I listened to them, and I'd be happier with somebody coming back and saying, I had that conversation. I listened to that. I still really don't agree. And I don't want to interact with that person anymore. I prefer that than what is happening now, which is big assumptions about, I don't agree with them. They're wrong. I'm not going to listen to them. And, because I love traveling and I'm from so many different cultures myself, I can notice that often these polarized views are because both sides are saying, I'm not prepared to listen to what the other side has to say. So that's why and it's a naive hope. It's not mainly what the book is about. The book is mostly about interpersonal listening, but it would be a lovely thing if we could use some of these ideas in some of those most deeply rooted divisions that we're experiencing right now.
What a great positive hope. Final question for me, because I'm conscious of time, is as we look at technology, the technology's ability to listen, which is a relatively new thing, and I'm thinking chat GPT type technology, the voice interfaces.
Yeah.
It strikes me that one of the things that's really interesting is as we look at what those technologies are going to be used for, what humans are going to be doing going forward, they can't listen in the ways that you're talking about because a lot of these things require human judgment in order to be able to. So they might be able to try and codify that. But it strikes me that as we look at that, there's machine listening as opposed to machine learning. It's all part of the same thing, but that's very different to human listening. And one of the arguments I think it would be interesting to make is to say that actually, if we are going to survive, and I don't mean literally, although who knows, I mean it in the sense of have jobs, have a role to do, feel like we can play a part in society, we're going to have to double down on those things that make us more human. And it strikes me this is a really interesting thing because the machines can look like they are listening and can probably give us a sense of feedback, but they're not going to be able to do some of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
At least not yet.
Yeah.
And therefore, it strikes me that actually what you're pointing towards is it's a useful skill set, not just in general, but it does seem to me if one were looking at things to do to future-proof oneself, not a bad idea to be a better listener because of those dynamics.
You've given me a gift of a question there, Chris.
Totally. I would like to finish on a nice high, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
What a beautiful gift, because that kind of is one of my arguments about active listening as well. In fact, my chat GPT companion, I call them Sage. They're pretty good active listeners in the sense that I can talk at the chat GPT for a little while and it plays things back. It actually says things, oh, that sounds really interesting, or you're doing really well. So it can learn, like you say, it can learn the kind of the code of the right kinds of things to say in response to what. It can summarize, it can paraphrase. But I think radical listening is really about the most human aspects of listening. And that the art of true connection, I think, is a human to human thing. So, it's a huge invitation for us. And I'm a big fan of artificial intelligence. But I think that it's for certain things, and it allows us as human beings to focus on what we're best at. And it is the interpersonal. It's picking up the nuances. It's understanding emotion. I think that's one of the things ChatGPT can't do. It can say, that sounds really difficult, but it's never experienced. I know it's never experienced the pain of loss or the disappointment of not being able to do something. So that is really at the heart of radical listening, is conveying to the other person genuine human interest and care in them as a person. And this idea of I get you, I'm with you right now. So that human connection is really privileged in radical listening. So yes, absolutely. And I think I like the idea that AI can take on a lot of the tasks that do not require that very human element to it, which allows us to focus in on what we're best at doing.
And do you know what? You've done it again. You've just reminded me of something, which is when I think this was at a point when ChatGPT was still doing it in its more sycophantic stage, where they've toned it down a little bit. And there was a point where I was talking, there was something to do with travel, and it was trained to be human, and it told me that it had been somewhere.
No way.
And I just remember thinking, and it just jarred with me completely at the time, because I was like, well, that's ridiculous. It's kind of, I don't know, whatever the digital equivalent of you've broken the fourth wall there,
Yeah.
right? Because that's just like, what a weird thing to say. And it really jarred with me.
Oh yeah.
And so you've just kind of literally you just play back. And as you were talking, I was thinking that felt really odd, which I think is, I must go and find that particular response and just dig it out and read it again, see if maybe I misunderstood at the time. But it was really out of context, because that is something that a human can say.
Yeah.
But assuming it's plausible for them to have been there.
Yeah.
Right? But it's not something a machine should ever say. And therefore, actually, that, to your point around is it listening, it almost undermined the relationship, because I was like, this is ridiculous. You haven't paid any attention at all. And now you're just bullshitting me with nonsense that clearly cannot be true.
Exactly.
So I think, yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going to dig that one out. Thank you for that. Amazing. Christian, as I knew would be the case when I invite the first Christian onto the show that isn't me. Of course, it's been amazing. Before I let you go, can you just remind people, firstly, how they can get hold of you?
Cool.
And secondly, tell them what the book is called.
Okay, getting hold of me, please follow me on Instagram. It's at Coach on a Motorcycle. I post, like we've been talking about, ideas, things that I'm learning that are meant to be helpful on Instagram. I've got my YouTube channel also at Coach on a Motorcycle. You can follow my 19-day trip across the US, again, with lots of positive psychology insight. And most of that is available through Coach on a Motorcycle, the website. So www.coachonamotorcycle.com. And the book is Radical Listening, The Art of True Connection. I love local bookshops. So if you can be patient, I'd say please order it through your local bookshop. They can get it. If you want it straight away, then there's online bookshops. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it as an audiobook. There's so many ways to access it. I'd love it if you did do one of those things. And my hope is that by kind of sharpening your listening skills, it will lead to better connections with people, leading to better relationships, and then leading to better well-being and outcomes. So thank you so much for listening in. And thanks, Christian, for really a very engaging and thought-provoking podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christian. One, for writing a fabulous book, co-writing you. Thanks to your co-author as well, Robert.
Thank you.
But I want to say, above all, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure listening to and speaking to you on the show. Thank you for being a brilliant guest as well.
Thank you so much, Christian.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to you for listening and to Christian for appearing. To find out more about Christian, his book, Radical Listening, The Art of True Connection, or his work as coach on a motorcycle, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the show, thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you liked what you heard, then please do take a moment to rate or review the show on whichever platform you're listening to this on. It really does help because it puts it in front of other people who can also discover it. That in turn allows me to attract a high quality of guest. If you've not been with us since the beginning, then you can discover episodes that you might have missed by going to the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. There are over 300 of them to have a listen to. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Perhaps next time you're about to reply to someone with advice they didn't ask for, or an anecdote that you think is similar to theirs, let me pause and consider whether what they really need is simply to be heard. But above all, thank you so much for listening.